Hello and welcome to Salome's Writer Therapy, where you and your writing connect, where I share tips and techniques on writing, but I also give you tools and clarity on how to choose the option that is right for the writer that you want to be. In today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about the different narrative perspectives in stories. I also have a free resource in the description below that will help you brainstorm the best narrative perspective for your story. So don't forget to check that out. So grab your favorite beverage and a cozy spot, and let's dive into today's episode. Before we begin, I just want to say that the number of point of view or POV characters you follow, or the number of main characters that you have in your story, doesn't necessarily inform the narrative perspective that you need to choose for your story. Meaning, you can have one or more point of view character in any of these narrative perspectives. I also just want to mention that you can write in any tense, past tense, present tense, or even future tense, regardless of the narrative perspective that you choose. So don't let that get in the way of choosing the right narrative perspective for your story. So speaking of, let's have a look at the different narrative perspectives you can use. So first, let's start with the most intimate of all the perspectives, first person narration. So, first person narration allows readers to step directly into the shoes of the protagonist. The narrator uses I to share their thoughts, feelings, and experiences. It creates a strong bond between the reader and the character, providing deep insight into their inner world. These novels draw readers into the protagonist's mind, fostering empathy and a unique connection. The next perspective that we're going to look at is third person limited narration. In this perspective, the narrator is external to the story and uses pronouns like he or she or they. However, they are closely aligned with one character's thoughts and experiences at a time, giving readers access to their inner world. It's like a window into that single character's mind. It offers a broader perspective while maintaining a strong connection to a specific character. And now, let's explore third person omniscient. In this perspective, the narrator is all knowing. They have access to the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of multiple characters. This allows for a comprehensive view of the story's world and various characters' perspective. It also offers a panoramic view of the story's universe, making it ideal for epic tales with a wide range of characters and settings and storylines. Next up is second person narration or epistolary narration. I'm just going to touch briefly on these types of narrative perspectives because they are not as popular or as widely used as the ones that I've already mentioned. In the second person narrative perspective, the narrator addresses the reader as you, making the reader feel like they are an active participant in the story, like a choose your own adventure story. Now, in an epistolary narration, the story is conveyed through a series of letters, diary entries, emails, or other written documents. This approach provides a unique and personal insight into the characters and their experiences. Now, if you look at these different perspectives, how do you navigate them if you write multiple POV or points of view? Before we go into how you can choose the right narrative for your story, I just want to talk about how you deal with multiple POVs in terms of the narrative perspective. Because if you remember from earlier in the episode, I mentioned how it is possible to have multiple POV or point of view characters in any of these narrative perspectives. So there are some things that you just need to keep in the back of your mind when you are writing multiple points of view. So if you have more than one POV character that you follow in your story, you just want to make the reader's experience as easy as possible. So regardless of what narrator you end up choosing, you need to separate each character's POV or point of view properly. So make use of scene breaks or chapter breaks when you move from one POV character to another, so that the reader won't get confused or frustrated. If you want me to go into more details on this specific topic of multiple POVs, let me know in the comments below. So now that we know what different narrative perspectives we have to choose from, how do you choose the right narrator for your story? Because each story and each writer is unique. So it's all well and good for me to say that you can choose first person narration or third person limited or even third person omniscient. But how do you actually know which one will serve your story best or which one you will work best with? So the first thing when you want to choose your narrative perspective is consider your story's theme and tone. So different narrative perspectives can evoke different emotional responses. For example, in a first person narration, it can create a sense of immediacy or intimacy, while third person omniscient can convey a more objective or distant tone. So if you think of it as on a scale, the most intimate and the most immediate of the narrative perspectives is the first person, and the most distant is the third person omniscient, and third person limited is almost in between the two. So if you think about it like a scale or even like a lens of a camera, the farther away you are from the subject, or in this case the story or the characters, then you might want to consider a more distant narration. So in that case, the third person omniscient would work really well. If you have a very immediate or intimate story that you want to tell and you need to be inside the character's head constantly and completely, then first person narration will work well, and even to an extent the third person limited. But basically what I'm saying here is just consider the tone of the story or the theme of the story to see what distance you need from your narrator. The next thing to consider is to evaluate your character development. Different perspectives allows different levels of development in your characters. For example, in a first person perspective, it allows a very deep exploration of a single character's inner thoughts and growth. If you have multiple POVs, because you are in the first person, it allows you to stay in that character's thoughts and mind and growth throughout the story. So you can accomplish a lot of development on a character level in first person or third person limited, even though third person limited in this case does provide character development, but you still have that broader view of the story world, almost like a backdrop for that third person limited narrator. So if you evaluate your character's development and what you want to achieve, then you might be able to see what narrator will work best. The next thing to think about is your plot complexity. Now, complex plots with multiple storylines and multiple characters may benefit from a third-person omniscient perspective, as it can provide insight into various characters' motivations, actions, settings, and the action that is happening in the plot. Simpler plots may work well with third-person limited or first-person perspectives. Now, this is not always the case. I'm not saying that a first-person and third-person limited perspective story is boring or simple all the time. But if you think about all the storylines that you want to follow throughout your story, if it is more complex, meaning if there's more than two subplots, so you have your main plot and two subplots, if there's more than that, it might get complicated to keep all the characters straight or all the storylines straight if you are in a first-person narration. So just keep your plot's complexity in mind as well when you are choosing your narrative perspective. Then the next thing that I want you to think about when you are choosing your narrative perspective is to consider your target audience. Now, some narrative perspectives may resonate better with specific audiences. Now, that does not mean that if a whole bunch of people prefer first person narration, that you can't use third person limited or omniscient. It's just to keep that in mind. For example, young adult novels, for instance, often uses first person or that close third person or third person limited perspectives to connect with teenage readers, but it's also about preference. And in this case, you can look at your own preferences as well. If you prefer to read in first person, then it stands to reason that you might find it easier to write in first person as well. And that leads into my next point, to experiment and revise. Now, it's okay to experiment with the different narrative perspectives in the early stages of your writing. So, write a scene or a chapter in various perspectives to see which one feels most natural and effective for your story. And don't be afraid to revise or to change your perspectives if needed. Just one tip. If you choose a perspective for your story, stick with that perspective throughout the entire story. It is not advisable for you to switch from first person to third person or vice versa in one story. If you are a newbie writer, which I would think you are if you are listening to this, then I would suggest to pick a narrative perspective and stick to it for your story. But if you are still working out the kinks and you are unsure, then do experiment. Even if it is just a short couple of paragraphs in one perspective or another, and see what feels best. It's ultimately your choice, right? And there is no right or wrong. This is just a way to make that decision a little bit easier. So, to recap, to choose the best narrative for your story, consider your story's theme and tone, or the lens through which you want your reader to experience the story, how close or how distant you want it to be. Evaluate your character's development, think about your plot complexity, consider your target audience, and don't be afraid to experiment and revise. In the end, the right narrative perspective for your story will depend on your creative vision, the story's needs, and your intended audience. So take your time to make this decision, as it will shape the reader's experience and the overall impact of your narrative. So that's it for today's episode. If you found this episode helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing and clicking the notification bell. And if you have a question, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. And remember to check out that free resource in the description down below. So until next time, may your creativity flow freely and your fingers dance upon the keys. Keep writing with joy and stay connected. Cheers.